Hey, let's have a look at News Hub Nation over the weekend. Matthew Hooton was on, and we last saw Matthew Hooton on Bomber's show, and I think you said this, Chewy. Where was he before the election? In other words, where was his commentary before the election? Remember, he looked at David Seymour and said, National will either fuck you quickly or they'll fuck you over slowly. That was a quote from Hooton to Seymour. So now he's talking a little bit about how the conversation is how ACT New Zealand First are positioning themselves in the negotiations at the moment. And then they go on to a bit of a conversation around, remember, National's cornerstone policy, everything they want to do is hinged on their tax cut policy. Everything. Their international buyers and their tax cut policies, everything. That's like the foundation of everything else. People like us were questioning it from day one when the numbers didn't work. Well, I guess now that you're looking at what, and we talked a bit about this last week actually, so maybe Hooton's following our lead. When you look at what ACT want and New Zealand First want, it's looking a lot more difficult to get something like that across the line. Now, this is Jenna Lynch. She's in the conversation as well. She says something terrifying and then laughs. And I think, oh my goodness, what she says is actually probably true, but the consequences of it, we know Mr. Luxon loves his consequences, are horrific. And it said very flippantly. Let's have a look.
Yeah, I just wonder about that time frame. I mean, is it positioning, Matthew, on both behalf, Winston and David Seymour yesterday, saying, we can do this within a matter of days? Does anybody believe anything like that?
No, but I think what they're doing is putting pressure on Christopher Luxon. Right. And they're both saying, look, we're not the problem here, and they'll want people to perceive that if there's any delay, it's the newbie, Christopher Luxon's fault that there's a delay. I guess the big thing that they're going to have furious arguments over is the centrepiece of the national campaign, which was the tax cut policy, which, let's just move on, it was a ridiculous policy. It was written by casino lobbyists and property developers, and it didn't add up.
Comrade Hooton again.
Winston Peters is...
Yeah, Hooton's not responsible at all, but just the way this is so flippantly said by commentators, like, we know they're all lying. Well, the public didn't. And the public voted for these bullshit policies. And now it's just like, they're not going to get them through, and Nicola Willis isn't going to resign. It's like, but hang on. Anyway, it's infuriating to me.
Is adamantly opposed to foreign buyers, Chinese buyers coming and buying up homes in New Zealand. And the ACT Party, to give it credit, it genuinely believes in fiscal responsibility and has opposed National's reckless and inflationary tax cut policy. So I think that's dead.
You think that's dead?
I can't see that they can get it in the time frame. I mean, it was meant to come in 1 July. Yeah. For that to happen, they'll need to legislate for the foreign buyer thing. They'll need to legislate for the casino thing.
Isn't it more likely that they still do the tax cuts and they just have to pay for them a different way?
Right.
Which less government.
Well, if they want to win the next election, I think they'd prefer not to do things which would drive up inflation interest rates. But
so can we just revisit that very throwaway comment? Isn't it just likely that they'll still do the tax cuts and have to find it somewhere else? Smirk. Because, again, we've been saying that for 6 months now.
Yep.
Where will that money come from? So if National wants to save face to push this through, where will that money come from? It will come from selling state-owned assets so landlords can get their money back and the wealthiest can get decent tax cuts, or massive amounts of cuts. And then we'll go back into the cycle that the public sector isn't serviced well enough because they will minimise the number of people in there. And then Labor will get back in 3 or 6 or 9 years, and they'll get the numbers back to what they should be. And then National will start saying, oh my God, they added 14,000 bureaucrats. It's like, well, because you got rid of 30,000 to find your fucking tax cuts for your rich mates, Chewy. And then the cycle continues.
Yeah, it's just straight out of the British Tory playbook, isn't it?
Yeah.
You run down public services to the point where people were complaining because the service is bad and there's poor value, and then you sell it off. And I'm really worried. How quick did they turn around on Three Waters, right?
Yeah.
Right, we're going to take the Māori out of it because that's what we were stoking, and now we've done this, and we'll leave a sneaky backdoor into it to maybe get privatized. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it.
I haven't done this. I haven't done this yet, but I am going to go through from a couple of weeks ago and get a list of their 100-day promises, because I know last week when we showed this about the gang patches, the response from Luxon is, "Well, we'll start something." But no, that's not what you promised. You promised to ban gang patches in the first 100 days, and his response last week was, we'll start the legislation to get there. So it's not what you promised. So it's really important for us to remember not just today what was said then, but in 3 years from now, remember what has been promised and not carried through on. Because remember, this new upcoming government is going to be in part there because they managed to sow the seed, rightfully or wrongly, that this current government, or the Labour government, is inept and couldn't do what they said they were going to do and never got anything done. So we have to hold them accountable to the same standard as they were criticising Labour for.
Yeah, remember, these tax cuts are for the low and squeezed middle income. Remember?
Yep.
And I guarantee you they will be the first to lose any sort of benefit, because who cares? You've done what you needed to do. You needed to vote National. We don't need to follow through for you. See you in 3 years. Business will be happy, and either our hand will be out to the Chinese to see if they're still giving out free money with absolutely no consequences, or we're absolutely going to gut everything that Labour have built.
Yep.
To fund
Lovely.
it.
Good times, folks. Good times. This has got 40 seconds to go. Let's get to the end of it.
That they still do the tax cuts and they just have to pay for them a different way.
Right.
Yes, government.
Well, if they want to win the next election, I think they'd prefer not to do things which will drive up inflation and interest rates. But then, the problem is that whether or not enough of them in the National Party currently understand the relationship between government spending, interest rates, inflation. I mean, they may. The bureaucracy had a rough time over the last 6 years.
They're the party of fiscal responsibility. Surely they understand those kinds of relations.
Well, I mean, the bureaucracy's going to have a difficult job. For 6 years, it got some practice of dealing with people who didn't know what, say, aggregate demand was. Right, okay. But they're going to find that they're going to have the same problem.
I want to talk about some other.
So the point being made there by Matthew Hooton is, obviously he's being facetious, but to say that National doesn't understand what inflation is. Now, I think they do understand what inflation is, but they're just trying to muddy the waters. And we've all seen it all the way through, whether it was Jack Tame catching out Luxon, making him admit that his tax cuts would be as inflationary, whether it was Nicola Willis saying they won't be inflationary, reading out script from, I think it was from Treasury, and it said wouldn't be as inflationary, meaning what she was talking about was inflationary. Whatever it was, I think they know obviously what it is, but they're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the public that what they're going to do will be inflationary. Because inflation, real simply, remember, is more money in the economy than there is goods to buy. And that drives inflation. Tax cuts, more money in your pocket. Remember what Nicola Willis said? If every single person saves their tax cut, it won't be inflationary, which means it will be inflationary, because not everyone's going to do that. And I don't know. I mean, I've seen some chats going past about people reckon it's going to be 3 months before people are regret their vote. I don't know. I have no idea. I know that when Brexit went through, there was regret and remorse literally the next day. I think this is going to be a tough time. And what it's important for us to do is to make sure we accept where the country is now based on where Labour's had it. In other words, if there are some issues like where inflation is right now, fair enough, put that on Labour's decisions. I'm okay with it because it saved 20,000 lives. But also not allow National for the next 3 years to blame all their issues on the outgoing government. They also have to have ownership of what they do, which is going to have flow-on effects, Chewy.
Yeah, I'm concerned that they might pull another page out of the Tory playbook. And it is one that has absolutely been disproven over the past 10, 15 years. And that's austerity. We need to put a freeze on public sector pay rises and hiring and public spending. That's how we'll get everything under control. Absolutely proven not to work. absolutely proven to pour cold water over any sort of economic rebuild.
Yeah.
Because if the government tightens their belts, then they tighten the belts for everyone. But it's just very clear to me that National have a lot of links with the British Tory party, and just seem to be getting a lot of advice from them. And if you see what the Tories have done to England over the last 10 years, that should scare the absolute bejesus out of all of us.